Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take this huge stack of dense, often kind of unrelated sources.
Yeah, like from behavioral science, clinical psychology,
Yeah,
even philosophy sometimes.
exactly. All that
Yeah.
complex stuff. And we try to, boil it all down into something clear, something actionable for you. Cognitive alchemy, we like to call it.
And today's deep dive, I think, is particularly compelling. We're really digging into the foundational architecture of what makes for a fulfilling life.
Right, because we often look for that one thing, don't we? That single book or system.
The magic bullet.
Yeah.
But the most powerful insights, well, they often come when you synthesize, when you bring together diverse fields. And our sources today, they reveal these three fundamental levers, basically.
Levers that, if you use them right, can really optimize your potential. We're not looking for one guru, like you said.
No.
We're looking at the research, how we engineer better habits, how we navigate relationships, intimacy, all that messy stuff.
And also how we frame things,
Right.
how we deal with the hard truths, the constraints we can't avoid.
Yeah, acknowledging the breadth of it all and saying, okay, let's unpack this intersection where, science meets attitude.
So we've meticulously grouped these diverse insights. We found they naturally fell into three, foundational pillars that emerged from the material.
The meta themes, the core operating system, maybe.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The first one we're calling intentional action.
Okay.
This governs how we structure our lives. It focuses not just on goals, but really on the systems we use to build habits, and importantly, how we cultivate genuine intrinsic motivation.
Got it. Pillar one, action. What's number two?
Number two is meaningful connection. This is the deep dive into relationship dynamics, attachment theory, conflict, the paradox of intimacy, all of that.
The human element.
Absolutely. And the third pillar is adaptive perspective.
Adaptive perspective.
This addresses the crucial importance of mindset. Your attitude, essentially when you're confronting those external realities, biological, societal, whatever they are, that you just cannot control.
And the goal here, for you listening, is really utility. It's not just about absorbing more facts, right?
Yeah, not at all.
We want you to walk away with practical exercises, mental frameworks you can actually use today, like moving past that feeling of information overload.
Intellectual exhaustion.
Yeah, to having genuinely actionable knowledge, delivered clearly, engagingly. Let's jump in.
Okay, pillar one, intentional action. Let's start there. We all know this friction point, don't we? You decide on a good habit.
Exercise, meditation.
Yeah, or even something simple like journaling 3 grateful things. It feels totally rational, doable, beneficial. You stick with it for, what, a day, maybe 2?
If you're lucky, yeah. And then almost immediately it feels like you said, fighting gravity.
Exactly. Why is it so easy to slip back into the bad habits, the comfortable ones, and so incredibly hard to keep the good ones going? It really speaks to that compounding power of daily habits, but getting started. That initial commitment just vanishes. That fight against gravity, as you put it, that's the core issue, isn't it? We mistakenly think action is all about motivation.
Right. Just get motivated.
But motivation, it comes and goes. It's fleeting. The sources we looked at argue very strongly that we need to focus on the environment and the structure instead.
Okay, so less willpower, more architecture.
Exactly. Architecture is a great word for it. We have to make the desired behavior easier, almost automatic, by applying these specific engineered laws. And we start with the first law. Make it obvious.
Make it obvious, but isn't the habit already obvious? I mean, I know I should exercise.
But knowing you should isn't the same as being aware of what you're currently doing. Awareness is step one.
Okay.
Our sources really recommend starting with what they call a habit scorecard.
Habit scorecard.
Yeah. It basically forces you to stop running on autopilot and actually write down your current habits, often the unconscious ones, like the things you do without thinking when you wake up or before bed, or even just walking into a room. You can't diagnose or change something if you're not aware of it.
Like grabbing your phone the second you wake up, that's a habit.
A very common one. And it needs to be made explicit, written down, before you can even think about breaking it or replacing it.
Right, surfacing those automatic routines. Okay, so once we've done the scorecard, we've surfaced them. Then what?
Then we move to concrete planning. Now, this might sound rigid, but actually it's incredibly freeing.
Freeing how?
It frees you from relying on willpower. We use something called implementation intentions.
Implementation intentions,
It basically gives your abstract desire, like, I want to meditate more, a specific time and place.
Yeah.
Anchors it in reality.
Just like a formula.
Exactly. The format is rigid for a reason.
Yeah.
It cuts down on that mental negotiation. It's, I will behavior at time and location.
Okay, so instead of I'll meditate more, it becomes,
I will meditate for 10 minutes at 7 a.m. in the kitchen chair. Super specific.
I like that. That clarity just removes the debate, doesn't it? There's no should I, shouldn't I, just doing it.
Precisely. And that ties right into the next technique, habit stacking. This one, I think, is really powerful.
Habit stacking. I remember reading about this. This is where you link a new habit to one you already do.
Exactly. You leverage the established neural pathway of an existing routine. You connect the new behavior to an already reliable cue. You're not relying on an alarm clock, which is external.
You're relying on yourself.
Right, on the natural rhythm of your day. The structure is simple. After I current habit, I will new habit.
So give me an example.
Okay, say your established habit is pouring your morning coffee. The stacked habit could be, after I pour my first cup of coffee, I will open my journal.
Oh, okay. The coffee cue is automatic, so the journaling just flows right after. No separate decision needed.
Exactly. You bypass that need for a decision point. It's tapping into existing momentum.
I can see the neural efficiency there. The old habit is like a trigger. Okay, so that's law 1, make it obvious. What about law 2?
Law 2 is, make it attractive.
Attractive. Okay, this is where we start playing with our desires, right?
We stop treating these beneficial behaviors like chores and start making them feel, well, desirable. One really effective technique here is called temptation bundling.
Temptation bundling sounds intriguing.
It's where you pair an action you want to do with an action you need to do.
Like what?
Okay, say you're desperate to listen to that new true crime podcast, but you need to get on the treadmill. You only allow yourself to listen to the podcast while you are on the treadmill.
Ah, so the pleasure of the podcast becomes the reward, but it's tied directly to the chore.
Exactly. You leverage that immediate high dopamine desire listening to the podcast to fuel the beneficial chore, the treadmill. It's a clever hack of the system, as you said.
Yeah, it is. I also found it fascinating how much the sources talked about the social side of attractiveness, like our environment.
Oh, that's critical. Law 2 strongly encourages joining a culture where your desired behavior is just normal.
So hang out with runners if you want to run.
Basically, yes. Our environment shapes us way more than we realize. If everyone in your social circle is, say, training for a marathon, or drinking less, or reading nonfiction.
It stops feeling like this huge effort you have to make.
Right. It just becomes the baseline expectation. We're social creatures, fundamentally. We want to belong. So we tend to adopt the habits of the groups we admire or associate with.
Okay, obvious and attractive. Now, we absolutely have to get to laws 3 and 4, because these often feel like the ones that determine if a habit actually sticks past that first week or two.
Law 3 is make it easy.
Make it easy. Now, for our listeners who are pretty savvy, this might sound almost too simple.
It sounds simple, but the execution is crucial. It's not really about doing less work overall. It's about reducing the friction to almost zero, especially at the start.
Friction. Okay, how?
One key tactic is the 2-minute rule.
The 2-minute rule.
Yeah. When you start a new habit, the initial action should take less than 2 minutes to perform. Always.
So if my goal is write a book.
The 2-minute version is write 1 sentence. If your goal is run 3 miles, the 2-minute version is just put on your running shoes.
Oh, okay. The idea is just to master the act of starting, not finishing the whole thing right away.
Exactly. The first 2 minutes should be ridiculously easy. To create an entry ramp so smooth you basically can't say no.
I like that, an entry ramp. And the opposite is true for bad habits, right? Increase the friction.
Precisely. Increase the friction for bad habits. If you want to watch less TV, don't just rely on willpower. Physically take the batteries out of the remote.
Oh, I like that.
Put them in a drawer in another room. That tiny moment of friction having to get up, go find the batteries, is often enough to interrupt that automatic loop and give your rational brain a chance to step in.
Okay, so we've made it obvious, attractive, and easy, but habits still die out. We need law 4, make it satisfying. Why isn't the long-term benefit, like being healthier or having a published book, why isn't that satisfying enough in the moment?
It's that classic conflict between immediate and delayed gratification. Our brains are wired for immediate feedback.
Right. Candy bar now, feel good now. Gym now, feel sore now.
Exactly. The reward for eating junk food is immediate pleasure. The punishment, weight gain, poor health is delayed. For the gym, the punishment, soreness, effort is immediate, while the reward, muscle gain, better health is delayed.
So how do we make the good habit satisfying now?
You have to engineer an immediate, visible marker of success, something tangible.
Like checking a box on a calendar. If I meditate, I don't feel enlightened right away, but I can see that check mark.
Precisely. That check mark, or moving a paperclip from one jar to another, or using a habit tracking app, that visual proof of progress provides an immediate positive feedback loop. It gives you a little hit of satisfying dopamine.
So tracking isn't just for data nerds. It's actually part of making the habit stick.
Absolutely critical, according to the sources. It helps bridge the gap between the short-term pain of discipline and seeing the long-term pleasure of the results.
Okay, this framework for habits is really practical. But now, speaking of what drives us, let's pivot a bit. From engineered habits to the deeper truth about motivation itself, because there's a huge warning sign in the sources about how we try to motivate people.
Oh, yes. This is critical. And it flies directly in the face of the carrot and stick philosophy that dominates so much of, say, corporate culture.
The if-then rewards.
Exactly. Extrinsic contingent rewards. If you do this task, then you get this bonus, this grade, whatever. The research here is overwhelming. There was a massive analysis compiling studies over nearly 3 decades, 128 experiments in total.
And what did it find?
It confirmed, pretty unequivocally, that these tangible contingent rewards have a substantially negative effect on intrinsic motivation.
Wow. So they don't just fail to motivate long-term, they actually corrode the internal drive. They damage the love of the task itself.
That's exactly it. You turn play into work.
Why? What's happening in the brain?
Well, the neuroscience is fascinating. Studies using fMRI scans show something quite startling. The dopamine surge you get in the nucleus accumbens. That's the brain's pleasure and reward center when people anticipate these external monetary rewards.
Yeah.
It looks disturbingly similar, as one source put it, to the mechanism triggered by addictive drugs. Cocaine, nicotine, amphetamines.
Seriously, so giving someone a bonus for hitting a target is like giving them a tiny hit of a drug?
In terms of the brain's reward pathway activating for the transaction itself, yes. When you introduce that contingent financial reward, the brain seems to stop valuing the task for its own sake. You know, the curiosity, the challenge, the mastery, and starts valuing the reward, the extrinsic hit.
So that immediate financial rush gives you a high, but it's short-term, unsustainable, and it actually destroys the genuine intrinsic engagement you need for things like creativity, deep expertise, innovation.
Precisely. It burns out the engine. The alternative, the thing that does fuel that deep intrinsic motivation, is autonomy.
Autonomy. Having control.
Yes. The sources point to classic examples, like Atlassian implementing their 20% time.
Right, where engineers got 1 day a week to work on whatever they wanted.
Exactly. And initially, management was worried, right? Productivity might drop. But the outcome was clear. The engineers were actually way more efficient during that 20% time. Why? Because they were self-directed. They were focused on goals they chose.
So autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Those are the sustainable fuels. Contingent rewards are like, what? Throwing gasoline on a fire looks impressive for a second?
And then it's gone, and maybe you've damaged something. Yeah.
But, okay, let's bring this down to earth a bit. What if I'm not an engineer at a fancy tech company? How do I diagnose low autonomy in my own job, maybe? And how can I inject more of it if I'm, constrained by deadlines and bosses and actual requirements?
That's a really important question. Self-diagnosis, I think, starts by asking, how much control do I really have over what I work on, when I work on it, how I approach it, and who I work with?
The 4 T's. Task, time, technique, team.
Exactly. If the answer is consistently no, or very little, across the board, then intrinsic motivation is going to struggle. It just is.
So how do you inject more? Even a little bit.
You start small. Focus on where you do have some wiggle room. Maybe it's how you execute a defined task.
Yeah.
Even if the end product is mandated, can you choose your process, your method? Or maybe it's when structuring your workday, deciding when to tackle certain tasks. Even small pockets of autonomy can restore a significant amount of that intrinsic drive.
That makes it feel more achievable. It scales down. Okay, one last piece on this action pillar before we move on. There's this crucial check and balance idea, periodic reflection.
Yes. It's about finding the Goldilocks zone for feedback on your habits and systems.
The Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, too much feedback, like tracking every tiny metric daily, obsessing over every choice, beating yourself up over small slips. That's like looking at yourself in the mirror from an inch away.
All you see are the pores.
Exactly. You lose sight of the bigger picture, you see every tiny imperfection, and you get paralyzed by the data.
But the opposite, never reviewing your habits at all.
It means you're just running blind. You're completely unaware of the obvious flaws, the easy fixes you could make.
So what's the sweet spot?
Periodic reflection and review, say maybe monthly. Or quarterly, it gives you that conversational distance. It's when you step back and assess the system itself, not just a single day's outcome.
You see the patterns.
Right. You see the important systemic changes you need to make without getting lost in the daily noise. The goal is to view the entire mountain range of your progress, see the general direction you're heading, not obsess over every little peak and valley you hit today.
I like that metaphor, the mountain range. Okay, so this synthesis of intention, environment design, intrinsic motivation, and reflection, that's the foundation of powerful action. That systematic approach to action, it actually leads us quite nicely into our second pillar, meaningful connection. Because our relationships, I mean, they're arguably the most complex systems we navigate, right?
Absolutely. And the question becomes, where do we find stability? Where do we find growth in intimacy, especially when it inherently involves conflict, vulnerability, risk?
It's messy.
It's very messy. But the sources offer a really helpful paradigm shift here, rooted mainly in attachment theory.
Bowlby and Ainsworth and all that.
Exactly. And this framework, developed from their work and others, was kind of revolutionary at the time. Why? Because it drew its lessons from the population at large.
You mean not just people already in therapy?
Precisely. It looked at happy couples, unhappy couples, couples who seemed fine, the whole range, not just clinical populations. And that was huge.
So it gave us a broader baseline for understanding relationship behavior. It sort of normalized the struggle.
It absolutely did. It reframed behaviors that were previously dismissed as odd or misguided or even needy.
Like what kind of behaviors?
Well, think about someone with an anxious attachment style. Maybe they fluctuate wildly between wanting to leave a relationship and then desperately wanting to stay. Or they call their partner multiple times just needing reassurance.
Yeah, things that can get labeled as clingy or insecure.
Right. But attachment theory says, wait a minute. These aren't necessarily signs of personal feelings or pathology. They are understandable, predictable, even expected responses to a perceived threat, the threat of separation, or the feeling that your primary attachment figure isn't responsive.
So it's like an innate protest behavior, a survival strategy kicking in.
Exactly. It's wired in. And reframing it that way can be incredibly powerful, deeply validating for people who often feel judged or criticized for needing closeness or intimacy.
I can see that, but understanding the styles is key, right? Secure, anxious, avoidant.
It's crucial, especially for avoiding what the sources often call the anxious avoidant trap.
The anxious avoidant trap. Explain that.
Okay, so anxious individuals generally thrive on intimacy, support, stability, open communication. They want closeness. Avoidant individuals, conversely, tend to prioritize independence. They often put up emotional barriers, use what are called deactivating strategies.
Like pulling away when things get too serious. Or avoiding future plans. Minimizing intimacy.
Exactly. They deactivate their attachment system to maintain distance. Now, the paradox is...
Anxious people are often drawn to avoidance.
Yes. Why? Because the avoidance unavailability often triggers the anxious person's attachment system hard. It leads to heightened focus, preoccupation, sometimes obsession. They mistake that physiological anxiety, that activation, for intense chemistry or deep love.
Oh, wow. So the very thing that makes the relationship difficult is what draws them in.
It can be, yes. And the clear finding from the research is that people with an anxious style generally fare much, much better with a secure partner.
Because the secure partner provides the consistency.
The stability, the responsiveness. That gradually calms the anxious system down over time. Knowing this, understanding your own style, and recognizing others allows you to make more informed choices. You can steer clear of dynamics that predictably just heighten your worst anxieties.
Okay, so understanding attachment styles helps choose partners wisely, but once you are in a relationship, that tension, those differing needs, they're still going to cause friction sometimes.
Absolutely. And this brings us to John Gottman's research, which was heavily featured in our sources. His work confirms, even the most secure, stable couples fight. They all disagree.
It's not about not fighting.
No. The critical factor isn't if they disagree, but how they disagree.
Yep.
And more importantly, how they repair things afterwards.
Relational repair.
The practice of relational repair is paramount. It's the difference, Gottman says, between a minor skirmish and, all-out war. And the first principle for managing conflict well is the softened startup.
Softened startup. What does that mean?
The sources note that often, statistically, it's the wife who tends to raise the touchy issues first. But how she raises it matters profoundly. Starting a discussion with criticism like, you always, or you never, or with contempt.
That pretty much guarantees defensiveness, right?
It almost guarantees that the partner, often the husband in these studies, will immediately withdraw, stonewall, or get defensive.
Mhm.
It just escalates the negativity right from the start.
It's so hard, though, in the heat of the moment to not say, you never clean up, and instead say,
Something like, I feel really overwhelmed when the kitchen is cluttered after dinner. Could we figure out a way to tackle it together? That shift from a global you statement, which feels like an attack, to a specific personal I feel statement. That's the core of the softened startup.
articulate the need without assigning blame or malicious intent.
Exactly. And this leads into the ability to make, and maybe more importantly, to receive what Gottman calls repair attempts.
Repair attempts.
See, conflict inevitably leads to emotional flooding sometimes. That state of high physiological arousal where your rational brain just shuts down.
Right, the amygdala hijacks.
Yeah.
Prefrontal cortex goes offline, can't think clearly, can't empathize.
Exactly. And repair attempts are the lifeline. They're the bids to pull you both out of that flood before things get really destructive. Critically, though, these attempts don't always sound nice.
What do you mean?
They're not always gentle or sugar-coated. A spouse might snap, "You're getting off the topic," or grumble, "Ugh, can we just take a 5-minute break?" The delivery might sound negative.
But the underlying message is stop.
Yes. The underlying message is a vital repair. Stop, this is getting out of hand, let's de-escalate. The strength of the relationship isn't measured by the absence of fights, but by the willingness of both partners to accept those clumsy repair attempts, to prioritize the U.S., the mutual well-being, over winning the argument.
It's a huge shift from competitive debate to, like, mutual regulation, trying to keep the ship afloat together.
Perfectly put. Now, this whole discussion of conflict, intimacy, vulnerability, it naturally leads us to some deeper, more philosophical takes on love itself. The sources brought in Freud from here.
Okay, Freud on love. I imagine that's complicated.
Freud's perspective is, well, brutally honest about the inherent trade-off in love. He acknowledged that finding love, especially sexual love, gives us the most potent experience of overwhelming pleasure. It basically sets the pattern for our whole quest for happiness.
The ultimate high.
But he immediately follows that with a stark warning. He says, we have never so little protection against suffering as when we are in love, and we are never so desolate as when we have lost the object of our love or its love for us.
Wow. So love is this high-stakes gamble. Maximum potential pleasure, but also maximum potential pain and vulnerability. If you sign up for love, you're signing up for the possibility of profound suffering.
That's the Freudian take, yes. Then Erich Fromm comes along, and he tries to differentiate between immature love. He emphasizes that we have to mitigate that potential suffering by retaining our core self within the relationship.
Retaining yourself. How?
He defines mature love not as a complete merging where two people dissolve into one,
Right.
but as union under the condition of preserving one's integrity, one's individuality.
Okay, that sounds like a paradox, though. Two beings become one and yet remain two. How does that actually work in practice? That feels really difficult.
It is difficult, but Fromm argues it's necessary. He's distinguishing true love from what he calls psychological defense mechanism. Egotism à deux.
Egotism I do. Selfishness for two.
Kind of. It's where two people solve their own problem of feeling separate and alone by merging completely. They enlarge the single individual into two. They seem united against the world.
But they've lost themselves.
They've lost their independent critical self, yes. And Fromm argues this is ultimately an illusion. It often collapses under the slightest external pressure or internal change because there's no solid individual core left. Mature love, for Fromm, requires continuously maintaining your own identity alongside the connection.
Okay, so maintaining that integrity, the individuality within a connection, that requires self-awareness, self-respect, which brings us back around to psychological concepts like self-compassion, right?
Absolutely. Self-compassion is key here, and it's often misunderstood. People think it's just about being purely self-indulgent or selfish.
Yeah, letting yourself off the hook for everything.
But the way the sources frame it, particularly drawing on Kristin Neff's work, it's about a wise balance. The core component of common humanity means recognizing we're all flawed, we all suffer, so it's neither solely self-focused nor solely other-focused.
And crucially,
True self-compassion requires being willing to set boundaries, to say no sometimes, even to walk away from situations or relationships, even if it means disappointing someone.
why? That sounds like the opposite of connection.
Because connection is a core human need. If you continually engage in actions or allow actions from others that damage your relationships in the long run or damage your ability to be a whole person within those relationships, you are ultimately harming yourself, the self you're supposed to be compassionate towards. So sometimes protecting the connection and protecting yourself within it requires saying no or setting a limit.
That necessary link between our internal integrity and setting external boundaries, that's actually a perfect segue to our third and final pillar, adaptive perspective. This is all about how we frame things, how we manage the reality we can't fundamentally change.
Right. And let's start with one of the biggest psychological traps here. The relentless pursuit of perfect, constant happiness.
The happiness chase.
Exactly. We have to confront what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill.
The hedonic treadmill. Explain that again.
The data is incredibly clear on this. Objectively, life quality keeps rising in many parts of the world. Real income, for instance, went up dramatically over the last century in places like the US, Japan. People are objectively living better, safer, longer lives than ever before.
Okay, objectively better.
But this rising objective quality is constantly met with rising expectations. We adapt to the improvements, which means we end up feeling like we're constantly running in place just to maintain the same level of subjective well-being.
So we're living better, but we don't necessarily feel better about how we live. You get the bigger house, the faster phone, the huge TV, and after a few months, that just becomes the new normal, the new baseline, and you start looking for the next upgrade.
Precisely. We habituate to pleasure incredibly quickly. The baseline shifts upward. And compounding this whole issue is the modern problem of radical choice.
Too many choices.
Especially in things like unregulated consumer markets. They offer what seems like unlimited freedom of choice. And now freedom itself is generally good. This sheer abundance of options often leads directly to two negative psychological outcomes.
Which are?
One, increased regret over the decision you finally make. And two, persistent counterfactual thinking, constantly wondering about all the other options you missed. The opportunity costs feel huge.
Oh, yeah. Every time you choose a streaming service or a restaurant or even a career path, you're simultaneously kind of mourning all the paths and options you didn't choose. It makes the examined life really exhausting sometimes.
It does. And this is why that ancient quote from Socrates, "The unexamined life is not worth living," feels almost like a modern challenge. A prompt to question our automatic assumption that more choice always equals more happiness or freedom. Sometimes the ability to choose almost anything paralyzes us into being satisfied with almost nothing.
Okay, so if external circumstances and endless choices can overwhelm us, we need stable internal frameworks to cope, to maintain stability. And the concept of the narrative self seems absolutely foundational here.
It's the absolute core of our identity. The sources referenced Oliver Sacks's incredible work on neurological identity loss, particularly his famous case study of Mr. Thompson, who had severe Korsakoff syndrome.
Right, the man who couldn't form new memories, lost in time.
Exactly. And Sacks demonstrated quite profoundly that our sense of self, our identity, isn't some fixed thing. It's a singular narrative that we construct continuously, moment by moment, through our perceptions, feelings, actions. When that ability to maintain the thread, the continuity, is lost, the individual is plunged into this desperate psychological void.
So if your memory only spans a few seconds, the self literally just dissolves, constantly.
It leads to what Sacks vividly described as an irrational frenzy. The patient is driven, constantly, frantically, to create a self and a world to replace what is instantly forgotten. They confabulate, producing pseudo-narratives and pseudo-worlds in this desperate attempt to maintain some kind of chronological and personal stability.
Wow. That really proves that having a continuous, coherent inner story isn't just a nice-to-have. It's essential for survival. It's how we maintain a sense of me.
It's not a luxury. It's a fundamental psychological survival mechanism.
Okay, so if that narrative is so essential, then actively choosing a positive or constructive frame for that narrative, that becomes a really powerful form of self-preservation, doesn't it?
This is where optimistic interpretation becomes not just helpful, but almost a necessary skill for well-being.
Like Martin Seligman's work on learned optimism.
Exactly. His extensive work highlights the stark contrast. Pessimism, defined as a particular way of explaining negative events to yourself, tends to undermine health, success, resilience. Optimism, the opposite explanatory style, promotes them.
But the most intriguing application of this, maybe, was back in relationships again. The idea of benign illusions in marriage.
Ah, yes. Sandra Murray's studies.
It sounds so counterintuitive, like lying to yourself about how great your partner is actually helps the marriage.
Well, lying might be too strong a word. But Murray's findings are fascinating. Spouses who consistently view their partner more positively than their partner's closest friends do, and sometimes even more positively than the partner views themselves.
So there's a positive discrepancy.
Right. Those couples tend to have much stronger, more satisfying, longer-lasting marriages.
Why? What's the mechanism?
It seems to be a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm.
The partner, feeling seen through these rose-tinted glasses, outwardly starts trying to live up to that positive illusion. Your optimistic belief helps shape their behavior toward that expectation.
Wow. So optimism doesn't just make you feel better, it can actually help create a better reality between two people.
It's a beautiful example of how perspective is truly adaptive. It moves beyond just coping with reality to actively shaping it. And crucially, the sources emphasize this is really important. Pessimism, or learned helplessness, is not fixed and unchangeable.
It's not who you are baked in forever.
No, these are skills, explanatory styles that can be learned, acquired, practiced, honed. You can choose to deploy optimism. It's a toolkit, not a fixed personality trait you're stuck with.
That's incredibly hopeful. Okay, finally, under adaptive perspective, let's tackle the really hard stuff, the ultimate constraints, the things that seem genuinely unavoidable, maybe determined by forces beyond our control, our biology, our deep past, our environment. This brings us to a pretty deterministic perspective, doesn't it?
It does. We shift here towards B.F. Skinner's radical behavioral perspective. Skinner famously argued that the environment encompassing both our evolutionary history and our individual learning history, our conditioning essentially replaces the traditional idea of the autonomous agent, or free will, as the primary cause of our behavior.
He really challenged the whole notion of personal responsibility as we normally think about it.
Fundamentally, it's a staggering claim.
Mm.
If my actions are ultimately just a function of my genetics interacting with my environment, where does personal responsibility actually fit?
That's the million-dollar question.
Skinner lands it squarely in the domain of controllability.
Mm.
He asks these really tough questions.
Mm.
Like, if we generally accept that a person can't be blamed or punished for having, say, a physical disability or an involuntary tic,
Right.
then why do we blame or punish them for being, say, quick to anger, or for having a very high susceptibility to sexual reinforcement, especially if those traits might be demonstrably linked to genetic predispositions or neurological differences or past trauma?
We do it because we feel like they should be able to control it. There's a perception of moral failure there.
Exactly. The perception is key. But Skinner argues if you trace the cause back far enough to genetic factors, physiological conditions, inescapable environmental conditioning, then the concept of individual responsibility starts to look pretty weak, or at least less useful, practically speaking.
So what's the alternative? If not responsibility, then what?
Controllability. The crucial issue becomes controllability. We know that punishment is often ineffective at changing deeply embedded behavioral patterns or defects. So Skinner argues the focus has to shift entirely, away from blaming the individual for their makeup and towards changing the conditions, whether those are environmental conditions or perhaps even physiological ones someday, of which that person's behavior is a function.
Wow, okay, so it changes the entire mandate for society and maybe even for the individual. If you can't easily change the core trait through sheer will or punishment, you have to change the world around the person to support the behavior you want, or remove the triggers for the behavior you don't want.
Precisely. It's an extremely deterministic view, yes, but it forces us to look beyond just individual blame and think much more systematically about collective engineering, environmental accountability.
Give me an example.
Well, if we know, for instance, that certain individuals have a very high genetic or conditioned susceptibility to, say, gambling addiction, then society's ethical duty, from this perspective, might be less about punishing the gambler after they've lost everything and more about rigorously controlling the environmental cues, the availability of gambling, the advertising, or increasing the friction, as we discussed in Pillar 1, to make it harder for that predetermined susceptibility to be triggered in the first place.
Change the conditions, not just blame the outcome.
Okay, we've covered a huge amount of ground here, really moved from the micro details of habit loops all the way up to these massive questions about determinism and culture. This has been a proper synthesis. Let's try to quickly recap the core takeaways for each pillar. All right, so for action, Pillar 1, the big takeaway is that optimizing our potential isn't really about finding more motivation. It's much more about the deliberate, systematic design of our environment. Using those 4 laws, make it obvious, attractive, easy, satisfying.
And remembering that sustainable drive comes from autonomy, not from those external if-then rewards, which can actually corrupt our brain's own valuation system.
Exactly. Then for connection, Pillar 2, we saw that intimacy really thrives when we bring a scientific lens to vulnerability, normalizing our needs and reactions through understanding attachment theory.
And realizing that conflict is inevitable, but manageable. If we prioritize mutual well-being, use soften startups, accept those sometimes clumsy repair attempts.
Always aiming for that mature love. Talked about union, yes, but with preserved integrity, remaining two whole people.
Right. And finally, perspective, pillar 3. What's the core message there?
That attitude is profoundly adaptive. We have to consciously manage things like the hedonic treadmill and the paralysis of too much choice. We need to recognize that optimism is a skill, one that can literally shape our reality, even through things like those benign illusions in our relationships.
And remembering how vital that coherent inner narrative is. It's not optional. Maintaining it is the critical work of the self, as Sachs showed us.
So the ultimate synthesis, maybe especially when you weave in the deterministic thread from someone like Skinner, it's that our internal reality, our habits, our emotions, our personality patterns, it's all inextricably linked to and often significantly caused by external factors, many of which are uncontrollable.
But the power we do have, the leverage point, lies in our adaptive perspective, in choosing how we respond to and how we attempt to restructure the environment around those internal constraints or predispositions.
Exactly. And this raises one final, I think, quite provocative thought, something for you to maybe mull over after this deep dive ends.
Okay, leave us with something to chew on.
If we are, as science suggests, increasingly understanding the internal forces, the genetic blueprints, the physiological pathways, the unconscious drives that significantly limit our perceived free will, if the problem shifts, as Skinner suggested, from individual responsibility to collective controllability,
Yeah.
then this poses a really profound ethical challenge, doesn't it?
What is that challenge specifically?
If we know, or strongly suspect, that the internal wiring of a person makes them highly susceptible to certain struggles, maybe quickness to anger or poor impulse control, or addiction, what then becomes the ethical duty of civilization, and maybe even of the individual to the extent they have agency? Is the duty primarily to change the external environments that either maximize or minimize those uncontrollable internal struggles? If we can't easily change the person's core programming, must we focus almost entirely on changing the world they inhabit?
Wow, that's a profound question. It demands ongoing reflection, and it really ties all 3 pillars, action, connection, and perspective, together into one big, cohesive mandate for living well, both individually and collectively. Thank you for joining us on this exploration today. We genuinely hope you feel well informed and, more importantly, ready to apply some of these powerful insights in your own life.